Pilots of Reddit, what is the scariest moment of your career that passengers may have been oblivious to? Serious. ATC air traffic control gave my plane clearance to take off on runway 35 north at airport JFK, while simultaneously allowing for a similar aircraft to depart from runway 26 west. These runways cross one another. We almost collided at 500 AGL above ground level. The other aircraft was so close I could make out the expression on the pilot's face. Pilot of an Airbus 320 here. Flying into a high elevation port in Asia 23,000 feet on descent. Had a total loss of electrical power. All screens went dark including standby instruments and emergency lighting. To put this into perspective, Airbus designed this aircraft with 3 electrical generators in addition to power supplied by batteries and the emergency generator. It is designed never to be without electrical power. Even if both the engines failed, you run completely out of fuel and the auxiliary power unit is inoperative. It's a scenario pilots don't even train for, because it's never supposed to happen. After a partial recovery of our screens, it was followed by 12 consecutive warnings associated with different onboard systems. We landed safely. Passengers didn't notice a thing apart from the lights temporarily going out in the cabin. The car analogy would be you driving at 100 km/h on a highway and suddenly all your windows are covered up. You lose your speedometer and all electrical systems. There's no response from the brake or accelerator, but you can still feel the car going. Finally, my time to shine. Airline pilot here, going on 4 years now. I was flying into a small Midwestern airport in the middle of summer. On approach to the airport, we received an alert by the onboard equipment to climb immediately to avoid hitting another plane. Fair enough, climb as instructed, see the offending aircraft below us, and decide to continue the approach. On a 3-mile straight-in final to the runway, we spot a wall of torrential rain rapidly approaching the field. Looks far enough away that we think that we can beat it to the airport. About 100 foot off the runway the rain hits us, and we go complete whiteout. Can't see anything out of the windshield. Immediately start a go around, and we get as low as 20 feet before the airplane finally starts climbing. Upon exiting the rain, and at about 500 feet, we finally are able to see again, and get another alert for a helicopter right in front of us. This time we are told to descend. All in all, the most hectic and terrifying series of events in my entire time in aviation, about 10 years total now. I had a single engine rating and some time in piston twins. Grandfather used to be a pilot and owned a Piper Arista twin, but he had gotten to the age he hired pilots to fly when needed. One of his pilot buddies had told him he was good to go in an Arista, and Grandad asked me to meet his friend at the airport and let him take the plane around for 30 minutes or so as a refresher to the systems. Met the guy at the plane, and he was about as old as Gandard. I never turned down a plane ride, so I sat co-pilot while he did his thing. I had the sudden realization about the same time the wheels left the ground that neither of us had any business flying that plane. I could tell he just was not staying ahead of the plane mentally. I ended up taking a lot if the duties. I'm gonna go ahead and raise the gear. Let's go a little higher than treetop. Why don't we start a slow turn back to the airport? What I remember most is just booming over treetops at wide open throttle. The ground was moving super fast. Somehow between the two of us, we got back on the ground, but I think that was the moment that old pilot decided he was getting too old to fly. If the Delta pilots that flew my flight and landed on August 9, 2003 from Atlanta to Narita Airport are reading this, I want to say thank you for your balls of steel. You had me a little worried when you said we will make an attempt to land while Typhoon Eta was passing over the airport, but you did it. I have never in my life seen flight attendants so much as blink when hitting rough weather. The flight attendant sitting up the aisle from me was strapped into her seat looking out the window to her right in tear. The way the plane would twist, get forced down by wind, and then the engine's attempts to climb to recover causing the whole plane to vibrate violently was scary, but also pretty badass as to the demonstration as to how tough those planes truly are. The plane not only being blown up and down, but being blown laterally seemed like a difficult situation to control a plane in. I hope somebody bought you guys a drink afterwards. I was truly impressed, but I needed to change my pants after that. I've piloted, but not certified pilot, but I'm a certified R&P mechanic. Scariest moment I had in the air was a little over a year ago as I was flying from my home in Key West to visit family in Columbus. We were on approach into CMH and everything was going smoothly. All of a sudden I hear the engines get firewalled while the nose pitched up to about 15 over 20 degrees. It was an extreme enough maneuver that everyone in the cabin snapped alert and started looking around inside to see why. I knew the problem would be outside, so I look outside for clues on the wings. When I'm looking out I see a small Piper aircraft pass about 200 feet off our wingtip and only about 150 feet beneath us going in the opposite direction. How do I know it was so close? I can tell you the pilot was white wearing a blue shirt. As soon as a Piper passed the nose pitched back down and the engines were retarded throttled down. When I was deplaning I waited to be one of the last off. The pilots were doing the usual thanks for flying. I quickly asked near midair and the pilot got a serious look and nodded, but didn't actually say an answer, then went back to smiling and thanking the people behind me. Military pilot here. I was on a flight leaving Sigonella, Italy. Mount Etna had been erupting for the past 4 hours, but ATC cleared the southern sector to be free of volcanic ash. We flew directly into an ash cloud at 2,000 feet, remaining in the volcanic ash cloud for over 20 minutes. We had no luck climbing and punching out of the ash cloud, so we ended up doing an emergency descent to 1,000 foot to get out of clouds. We started experiencing engine malfunctions and had to secure 2 out of our 4 engines. Unfortunately in Europe, ATC is not responsible for obstacle clearance and we received a vector that would have flown us straight into a mountain. We caught the error and navigated back to the field to conduct a 2-engine emergency landing without incident. I literally expected every engine to cut out. I didn't expect to make it out of that volcanic ash cloud alive. Look up what volcanic ash does to jet engines. Commercial pilot here. Not at the airlines, but I did have a passenger. Working with a newer pilot we were flying over approach into a smaller airport. We were on with center en route control and were cleared into the airport with no other traffic in the area. We were flying in the clouds and once we get to about 10 miles out we started announcing on the CTAF airport traffic radio. No answer. About 3 minutes later, right after a radio call, we broke out of clouds on the approach about 2 miles out. Just in time to see another aircraft opposite direction entering the clouds about 100 yards off our right wing. Someone was trying the big sky theory and not talking on the radio. Scarred the crap out of me. I used to work accounting for a very small chartered airline that flew some small twin engines on short hops around Europe. By law, they were only required to have a single pilot, but part of our service was that you always have a co-pilot, which we of course charged for. Last minute flight came up one evening, 5th of November. I remember seeing the bonfire night fireworks going off to do a run from our hub south of London out to Wales somewhere. All of the pilots were out on other flights or had hit their hours, so the owner of the company asks me to go, put on a white collared shirt and a black sweater one of the other girls had left in the office. There I am, standing by the plane, confidently greeting passengers and wishing them safe voyages. I'm still surprised no one commented that I was wearing heels. After we were in the air about a half hour, he turns to me and goes, "Nerdheroin, you're in charge," and takes his hands off the controls. I about shoot myself. Turns out we were on autopilot and there wasn't much I could have done, but I'm sure the passengers would have been thrilled to know that their co-pilot in charge had had exactly 26 minutes worth of training. Charter pilot here. One flying a single engine plane in IMC descending to destination on a GPS approach. Not real cold and no icing forecast or reported. At about 6,000 feet I noticed ice building on the wings and windshield. It continued building up until about 3,000 feet, and by then the plane was flying heavy. This airplane had no de-ice equipment. The whole time me and the co-pilot are saying we hope our packs aren't seeing this. We landed without incident and the ice had turned to slush. We are thinking all is okay. Pax didn't see anything. One of the Pax climbs out of the plane and exclaims, "That was so cool. Did you see all that pretty ice on the wings?" I got several pictures on my phone ! To me and a co-worker are returning from a meeting. He was not a pilot, We were landing at an uncontrolled airport and I overflew the field to have a look at the windsock. It was standing straight out and indicating a strong direct crosswind. I attempted landing 3 times and was blown way off course each time. The 4th attempt I was about 20 feet above the runway and the airspeed indicator is jumping wildly due to the 25 to 30 knot crosswind from my right. In a crosswind approach you turn your aileron into the wind and apply opposite rudder, so you are flying with your wing in the wind slightly lower than the other one. Intense and keeping an eye on the airspeed when all of a sudden the airspeed needle drops to nothing. I was in a macro burst. It is the same as wind shear, but at ground level. I was in a downdraft of wind that was blowing my airplane to the ground. I pushed the throttle all the way forward in an attempt to gain some airspeed. I hit the runway on the main gear. Not real smooth, but I was down. I was still set up with my aileron turned in the wind when all of a sudden the wind changed direction and began blowing from my left. I was still rolling about 50-60 miles per hour when the left wing raised up before I could correct the controls. My coworker sensed no real sign of trouble until now. I corrected the controls for a left crosswind and looked out the right window and noticed that the right wing tip was about 2 feet from digging into the runway and cartwheeling the plane. After what seemed like forever, the plane settled back down on both main gear. I taxied to the ramp and could not walk when I got out. I just sat on the ground for about 10 minutes. Commercial airline pilot for 5 years. Nothing that would really make you pucker up. The things that generally feel the scariest, heavy turbulence, are really not that dangerous at all, unless you are very close to the ground. And if that happens, we would just climb back up and try to land a little bit later or at a different airport. I have had a few close calls where another airplane flies close to us and our onboard equipment tells us to climb or descend to avoid it, as have most airline pilots at one time or another. But they weren't so close that you would see them whiz past you. 10 or 15 seconds to impact with no course correction, which is farther away than it sounds when you are traveling at 200 miles per hour. Some onboard equipment has failed, but nothing so serious as an engine failure. Even those aren't so bad. We spend the majority of our annual/semi-annual training preparing for those. The most common brush with death that I've not yet experienced is probably wake turbulence taking off behind or landing behind a very large aircraft. I've flown with many pilots who told me that they have rolled past 90 degrees, so the aircraft is very slightly upside down with the wingtips pointing up and down. After passing through the following aircraft's wingtip vorticist //www.youtube.com/watch v equals uxrngimgls/t=11. However, I cannot think of a time I was truly caught off guard or felt unprepared to handle a situation that arose while flying. Maybe I'm tooting my own horn, but there is a reason that flying is the safest way to travel. Good question. I was flying from Boston to Columbus, Ohio, and in between us was a huge line of thunderstorms. In events like that, ATC will, in short, let you draw your own flight path to dodge the intense weather cells. The plane has weather radar in the nose and gives us a visual map of red spots to avoid. The flight was 3 hours long and the captain and I were spending every second of that time flying up, down, left, and right, dodging lightning and turbulence. Sweat was pouring down my face as I was using my best judgment on which direction to fly. We must have done a good job because the flight attendant called up to the flight deck to say all the passengers were sound asleep. Twice I have flown through a cloud of birds. Once just finches. Little tiny guys about 100 plus. It was scary because I was in single seat turboprop aircraft and they could have gone through the seat pit and struck me. At the speed I was going they didn't look like birds, just black bullets. It is exactly like a movie from WW2, just black rain going by. I had to fly home afterwards for fear of wing dents from bird strikes. The second time was over a dump in Darwin, Australia. The dump tip, as they call it, wasn't on the map and had about 10 billion seagulls and various other birds over the top of it. As I flew through this time in a military helicopter, the effect was the same, only this time the bullets were basketball sized and could easily cause enough damage to kill me. Think that scene in The Last Crusade where the German fighter goes down from birds. I still have no idea how I didn't hit one. You may ask yourself how a flock of bads can just appear out of the sky, but sometimes they just do. Especially when you are flying low and fast, like we do in the military from time to time. Those two moments were probably the single scariest moment in time. As in, oh shit, birds. 10 seconds go by, birds fly past. Few still alive. Scarier is when a sequence of events happens that you are not sure if you are going to make it for some time. The main one that springs to mind is when I was flying off the northern coast of Japan and we couldn't find the ship we were trying to land on in icy fog. Helicopters don't do very well in severe icing conditions. Watch Art of Flight, the snowboard movie, for a great example of what can happen. And we had to do multiple approaches through ice fog to try and spot the flight deck and land before the bird iced up. Conditions where we launched from had deteriorated to worse than the ship area during our time of flight. So a RTB wasn't a good option. It wasn't terrifying, but just overall not fun. Exploding hydraulic pumps are always scary. Really, anything that jacks up the flight controls. I also had a Bell 206 Jet Ranger lose its only engine on short final into a grass pad. We fell the last 10 feet of that approach. But we train for that sort of thing all the time. It just isn't a fun feeling when it happens unannounced. There are lots of times you can scare yourself, but the longer you do it, the less surprises you. My mother got me a flight lesson for my birthday one year. It was at a small private airfield, and we were in a Cessna Skyhawk. Don't remember the number. It was the instructor and I in front, and my mother in the back seat. We did a few touch endos, some basic skills stuff, and then we were just chatting and enjoying the ride heading back to the home airport. It was very relaxed, and I commented how unexpected easy it is to fly a plane. The instructor had a bag of pretzels, which he then proceeded to start choking on. My mother became a basket case and was trying to hemorrhage him from the back, which was ridiculously ineffective. I was basically leaning over and punching him in the back, and the plane was descending rapidly. He got the thing down finally as we were on the verge of stalling. Never took another lesson, and I'd fly as little as possible now. There were two. One flying a chase mission. I was in a C-182. Chased aircraft was also a 182. The pilot of the aircraft that was being chased, lead plane, had never flown with a chase or in formation before. I was in tight at his 5 o'clock position. He above me slightly. We started a left bank to turn around, and he descended abruptly. The turbulence from his right wing caused my left wing to stall. I snap rolled to the left, and I had to execute an impromptu split S. We were at 2000 when it happened, and I recovered with about 500 to spare. The chase fotog that was with me thought that I had snap rolled and split S on purpose and didn't think anything of it. When we landed, I yelled at the lead pilot for about an hour for not calling his maneuver to on a flight from Van Nuys to Las Vegas, flying there with a couple of other people that had never flown in a cabin class piston twin. Both packs were white knuckle flyers. About 50 miles southwest of Henderson, hit a downdraft that pegged the VVI at about 6,000 FPM down. Nose was pointed straight down, and we were at about -1 G for a few seconds. Threw out the spoilers and slowly leveled off. After that, got an ATC call for moderate to severe turbulence. I returned the call with thanks. I found it. Didn't tell the packs that we had just hit one of the worst turbulence episodes I had ever seen when we landed. One pax asked me if that had ever happened before. I replied that it happened all the time, and that there was nothing to be worried about. She smiled and said, "Oh, good." I was worried that we were going to die. C-17 pilot, excluding war stories. Only time I thought we were going down was at home station. Had just done a planned go around out of a circle and proceeded to level off at 1500 AGL for another pattern. So I chopped the throttles to idle to catch 200 kts and then push a little power to maintain airspeed. Engines don't spool up. I'm now a 270,000 pounds idle power glider with 1500 to work with in the runway directly behind me. Doesn't work well. We have procedure for loss of all engines but nothing for 4 engines stuck at idle. I check maximum, still nothing. At this point the other pilot has noticed me throwing the throttles to maximum and wonders why till I yell engines, and he looks at the tapes and sees maximum throttles and no spooling power. Engines kicked in about 4 to 6 seconds later, but those were the most terrifying seconds of flying I've ever had. No altitude, no checklist, no runway. Made the next one a full stop. I really want to add to this thread, but I have been very fortunate in my career. Probably the most busy time in a seek pit was after we were hit by lightning going into St. Louis. But the passengers knew about it, so it doesn't qualify under your request. It wasn't Scariest here built to handle this, but we were busy making sure everything was working as it should. Perhaps the most suitable story is of a student pilot I had when I was instructing. He rotated the 172 well before it was ready to fly. As I grabbed the controls, he was aiming directly for an antenna off the side of the runway. I had to push nose down to gain just enough speed to pop the wing up over it. As we were coming back around in the pattern, he looked at me and said, "I'm getting better, aren't I?" He had no idea how close he came to killing us both. He definitely had no idea how close I came to killing him once we landed. This doesn't 100% count, but currently in flight school, and I've got to say doing stall training. My only passenger was my instructor, who obviously knew what was going on and instructed me on how to do it, but nonetheless, being in a stalled aircraft dropping like a rock is scary shoot until you pull out of it. I had a distinct picture in my mind of an NTSB investigator standing over my charred intestines intermingled with tiny bits of aluminum spread across some farm in the middle of nowhere if I somehow never pulled out of it. Ironically, spin recovery was actually a lot less scary, just seemed like a roller coaster. This isn't so scary, but it was rather odd. I'm not a pilot, but I watched this happen. I was flying in a small twin turboprop Dornier Do 228, I think around 1987, on a route I took frequently. The plane used on that route was so small that there was only one door to the passenger compartment, and the emergency exit was in the seat pit, next to the co-pilot's seat. This being pre-9/11, there was no lock seat pit door, no door at all in fact, just a curtain, which FAA regulations required be open on takeoffs and landings for passenger access to the emergency exit. Over the months I noticed that about half the time the pilots on these flights would leave the curtain open for the entire flight, so I always tried to sit at the front of the plane to watch the action in the seat pit. Since I took this particular flight frequently, I grew pretty accustomed to when we would be close to our destination city, begin descent, etc. I enjoyed watching the pilots go from cruising mode where they were flying straight and level, and on autopilot, and not particularly active, to landing mode where they would fly manually, line up for approach, be constantly doing pilot things, etc. This particular flight was a clear night, and the curtains had been left up. I was just starting to think that it was odd that I couldn't see that lights of our destination city when I saw the pilots acting sort of surprised, not worried, just sort of caught off guard, and we made an abrupt course change. Shortly thereafter the pilot came on the intercom to tell us that they had been given a bad vector and that we were off course. 15 to 20 minutes later we arrived at our city without further incident. Whether it was a control or airline problem or pilot error, I never found out. This gave me an appreciation for how those flights from time to time end up landing at the wrong airport. Descending into feet. Mars and the autopilot disconnects. What do you do when the autopilot disconnects? You reconnect the autopilot. It disconnects again. Grab the controls and they are extremely heavy and getting heavier. We could turn the airplane just fine, but it took me putting my feet on the dash to control the pitch up and down. We ask for a long approach, it's a long runway in feet, miles, and controls are still heavy, but there's little wind and nobody notices. As soon as we get over the runway, the control column freezes entirely, no up or down. We flare pull the nose up with electric trim and make a halfway decent landing. Only thing the passengers may have noticed was the nose wheel came down a little harder than usual because we couldn't control the rate at which it dropped after the main tires touched. Airplane sat grounded in feet, miles for a month while they tore it apart looking for the problem. They found nothing. Finally decided it must have been ice freezing the cables somewhere, which later thought, but we never bought the explanation. It should have gotten better as we descended into warmer air, not worse. TLDR. Slowly lost pitch control of the airplane. Landed. Nobody noticed.